Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Curtin, the CEO of the Gypsy Nurse and TravCon, and welcome to this week's edition of the Travel Nursing and Allied Life podcast brought to you by TravCon. Today, I would like to welcome special guest Zac Shephard. Zac is a nurse fellow at IA Healthcare. Welcome, Zac. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Steve. It's so nice to be here with you.
Yeah, and I understand you're going to be at TravCon, which is only a few days away. So we look forward to seeing you and the team from IA out at TravCon.
Yes, we are all very excited. We have had a couple big meetings about it, and we're very pumped to be there.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to seeing you and the rest of the great AYA team there. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us for today's podcast. The title of the podcast today is Journey of a Nurse Fellow, Zac's Insights on Travel Nursing and the Future with AYA. So, Zac, obviously, there's lots going on in the travel nursing world today. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about your journey as a traveler and subsequently your connection with AYA. To start out, what led you into travel nursing?
Totally. Yeah. So I began travel nursing in 2018. At that point, I was about 5 years into my career as a staff nurse in an ICU in Dallas, Texas. And I think I kind of felt what a lot of nurses feel at that sort of point in their career, which is, I was feeling some of that burnout, which I think so many nurses feel. I was feeling like I kind of maxed out my growth a little bit in terms of my role at that hospital in that system. And I felt a little conflicted because I loved bedside nursing. I loved the ICU. I loved the work. I loved my colleagues. I loved taking care of the patients. But I also didn't really know how to balance the things that I loved about my job with the things that I felt sort of like not fulfilled in, or like I said, feeling like I kind of been maxed out. So, um, travel nursing was one of the options that I looked at, along with, going back to school and doing, CRNA or NP, doing, leaving the bedside altogether. And ultimately for me, travel nursing was sort of the lowest risk, highest reward option at the time, just because I felt like no matter what happened in 3 months, if I did a contract and I didn't like it, then in 3 months, regardless, all the other options would still be there. I could still pursue those other things. And it was the role that sort of allowed me to remain connected at the bedside. And so that was in early 2018. I took my first assignment with AYA. I was in Dallas and I went to Colorado and really just fell in love with the entire process. And
Wow. Well, it certainly you've done a lot of traveling in the years that you have been a traveler. That's a lot of assignments, a lot of facilities for sure. When you look at nurses today that are considering travel nursing, what are some of the things that you would tell them? What advice would you give them, generally speaking, about travel nursing?
the first thing is to be willing to have a hard conversation with yourself, right? I think what happens is in our careers as nurses is that we kind of tend to be set on a path, not necessarily like viewing it as building our own path. Um, And so as we go through our careers, our needs change, right? Our experience paradigm changes as travelers, as nurses. The least amount of flexibility, the least amount of options that you have as a nurse is at the very beginning of your career, right? And so often nurses get into their first jobs, they get into their careers, and they take the first job that they get out of nursing school, and they kind of feel like they're stuck in this set path. And again, those are the good options, and that's the option that you have when you're first out of nursing school. But as your experience grows, as your skill set grows as a nurse, your opportunities also grow. And I think sometimes we don't always connect those two things as nurses. And so in the ways that you can leverage your experience, leverage your skill set into more opportunities further in your career, that's the best approach to take. And so, but really that starts with having a hard conversation with yourself. And what I mean is asking yourself hard questions and not being afraid for where the answers take you, right? So if you're a nurse and you're in a role and you're feeling like unfulfilled, or you're feeling like you don't enjoy the work anymore, you don't enjoy where you're at, then those are questions you have to ask yourself. Am I happy with the job I'm at? Does this role fill the need for this point in my life? And then secondly, I would say that once you've kind of gotten to that point where you do know that you want to pursue traveling, if you're waiting to feel 100% ready, then you're never going to be a traveler, because there is sort of the reality that you need to embrace the unknown, that you need to kind of face some of these uncertainties with some resilience and some grace as a traveler. There's just so many variables as a travel nurse, especially when you travel as long as I have and you've gone to all these different places, where you realize that there's just so many things happening around you that you cannot control. And so that is part of, I'm of the belief that that is part of being a traveler. And so, even in the process of getting into traveling, you have to get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm not going to feel 100% ready. I'm never like, it's going to be scary, and scary is like, okay.
Great perspective
Yeah.
and great advice. I love the way you put that. Um, One of the things that we hear about and we experience as part of the Gypsy Nurse team is a lot of travelers express concern or difficulty in terms of balancing their personal life and their professional life as a traveler. With
Mm.
the experience that you've had, how do you do it? What advice do you give? Because we know, as you said, if you're waiting for the right time, there's never going to be the right time. It's never going to be a perfect situation. You have to take that leap. But when you traveling is a very demanding and challenging and certainly rewarding path. But I think there's a lot of challenges in terms of that work-life balance, that personal life balance. How do you navigate it? What advice would you give?
Totally. And I think that, the traveling experience, especially when you're in a location and you're on assignments and you're in a place that you don't know and you're not around anybody that that's sort of an all-consuming experience, right? There's just 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are in that environment, and like balance feels like a foreign idea. um, Even in your downtime, it feels like a foreign idea. And so, in that sense, I think I have always been such a big believer in sort of having a system as a traveler to kind of help you one, unload the stress of the work of nursing, because nursing is a hard job, and it's important that clinicians sort of have that process for themselves. And it could look 1,000 different ways to 1,000 different nurses, but as long as you have a system that works for you, and you can show up on a Tuesday morning after a really hard Monday morning and be ready to take care of patients and show up and rise to the occasion, because ultimately you're probably going to face more challenges that day. And so
Yeah.
whatever that system is for me, that looks like, I'm very religious about my fitness and like doing something or being outside in nature, journaling and writing and those sorts of things. And so those are the pieces that help me. And then I think seeking community too is really helpful. And
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways that we can do that. We can talk more about that as we get further into the podcast.
Yeah, no, I definitely would touch on that, particularly with our role at the Gypsy Nurse and TravCon in terms of bringing the community together. I'd love to get your perspective in terms of what that travel nursing community is all about, because it is very unique. Um, let's talk about agencies and the relationships between travelers and recruiters and agencies. Obviously, that's kind of a critical component to travelers and travel success. What is some advice you would give in terms of choosing the right agency to work with as a traveler? And how did you choose Aya as a
Mm.
traveler? Yeah.
Even in 2018, when I started travel nursing, I remember Googling, top travel nursing agencies, and I was one of the results. But even then, I felt overwhelmed with all the options that were available in 2018. And the crazy thing is, now I know for nurses today, that is just the magnitude is 5 times of that in terms of the
Yeah.
agencies that exist, and which in terms of the agencies that exist, and which direction to go for a travel nurse. And so I think for me, on the front end, that bond with my recruiter was really something that led me into wanting to pursue the entire process of building a profile and submitting for assignments with Aya. And then the thing that kind of kept me with Aya over the years has been their just consistency, their support, the infrastructure, and I think just the mindset and the mentality that I get from interfacing with them as a clinician. As an example of that kind of support that I'm talking about, I was wrapping up a contract in the East Coast, and I had just finished it, and this was in 2021, so we're still in the pandemic, and it was before Delta wave, but after, I think, the second wave. And I was driving all the way across the US. I had taken a contract. I had done nights for 6 months, and I was working like 75, 80-hour weeks during the
Mm,
peak of the pandemic in New York and
yeah.
New Jersey. And I had driven all the way across the country, and I got to Nevada from New Jersey. I got to Nevada, and my recruiter calls me and says, "Hey, I don't know how to tell you this, but the hospital's census has changed, their needs
Oh,
dropped, and we're gonna have to cancel your assignment." And I'm in Nevada. I mean, and all my stuff is in my truck, and I'm just like,
uh,
oh my gosh. And I mean, I had already been at that point. I traveled for 3 years, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna panic. I'm just gonna like just take a beat and let's listen to what he has to say. And so he's like, what? I'm going to go into overtime here. I'm going to go into overdrive. We're going to get the whole team working on it. We're going to find something for you that works based on, because I mean, I had 3 months of housing already set up in LA. Um, and he was like, just hang tight, because I don't want you to
mhm.
keep driving if we can't find anything, but just hang tight. And within an hour, he had found an assignment for me that was actually better paying than the one I was going to be working at, and closer to my housing. And so yeah, I think it was sort of their mentality of being like, we're going to do right by you. We're going to make
Yeah,
this right. This is not your
so
fault.
important.
It's not their fault, but just
Yeah,
their desire to make it right, to realize that I had all the stress, that I had all of this, like all the risk is on not all of it, but a good chunk of the risk is on the
sure.
traveler in travel nursing. And the fact that I felt like they respected that, the fact that I could
Yeah,
tell that they went into overdrive to fix that problem, just meant a lot. And that's just one example of plenty of times where, whether it was my recruiter with Aya or payroll fixing a pay issue like immediately or on the day of, or my travel experience representative coming through and helping me find housing. It's just sort of the sum of all the parts, I think, really is what makes Aya special and what kind of builds it into something beyond that.
yeah. It makes such a difference when you feel that somebody has your back, somebody has your best interests in mind, and let's face it, life on the road, things aren't always going to be perfect, right? But when
Totally.
you do get those curveballs, if the agency you're working with can adjust and help you out, it makes all the difference in the world. Speaking of that, and speaking of life on the road, yeah, again, obviously, and you know better than many, but things aren't always going to go perfect. What are some characteristics you think would make for a successful traveler? And in terms of lessons that you learned, life lessons, what are some things that you've learned being on the road? I would assume things like resiliency and flexibility have to be right up there, right? In terms of dealing with those ups and downs on the road. But any other advice or lessons that you've experienced that you want to pass along?
In a sense, I think when I started travel nursing, my mentality was, okay, if all goes horribly wrong here, then I'm just going to be sort of enduring 13 weeks at a new hospital, right? When in reality, travel nursing was never about that for me. Travel nursing was actually helping me sort of change my relationship to change. Um, I think so frequently in life, I think so frequently even in our careers, we're creatures of habit. Like we gravitate towards things that we're comfortable with. And travel nursing was just like the epiphany, the aggregate, the agitator that sort of changed that for me. Um, in that it's not just a lesson that you learn one time as a travel nurse. You don't just step into the first hospital on your new assignment and you're like, oh, I got it.
Yeah,
I'm now this, flexible, nimble person. It's a lesson that you have to learn over and over and over again. And even within an assignment, you get comfortable in things. And, as they say, comfort is the enemy of progress sometimes. And so for me, I think just embracing change is really one of that primary sort of characteristics of a traveler
mm,
that I think it
so
leads them to
important.
the most success. Yeah.
Yeah, great advice, and we hear that a lot in our community. The aspect of being nimble, being flexible, knowing sometimes you just kind of have to roll with it,
Yeah.
and that's as you were kind of alluding to earlier. That's one of the exciting things about being a travel nurse is every day is different, every assignment's different. You're not going to be stuck on a rut. You're going to be doing different things, but by the same token, there will be some curveballs, and you need to
Absolutely.
be prepared with them. Zac, I'd like to shift gears a little bit. And so you talked about kind of your career and what led you to travel and some perspectives on travel. But obviously, relatively recently, you joined Aya as a nurse fellow. So you are now working directly with Aya in that role. Could you tell our audience what is involved in that role and what you're doing with Aya in that role as nurse fellow?
The entire journey has really been very organic. Initially, it just started with like, tagging them on things on my Instagram. And then it sort of, this role sort of, I think the genesis of it really started at the same time that my journey as a nurse writer started. I am definitely someone who wants to advocate for the things that I believe in. That's why I care about nursing so much, and I have such a desire to advocate for nursing, is because ultimately I am such a big believer in nursing and the importance of nursing. And I identified very early on in my career that there was a real vacuum there, that we needed more advocates, that we needed more people who could help share about nursing. Um, and so through the pandemic and in the early parts of 2020, I just started writing some stuff on social media just for my friends. I mean, I had maybe a few hundred followers on Instagram at the time. And one of my friends was like, "Hey, this is really good stuff. This is really helpful to read this stuff from someone who's on the front lines and is like experiencing these things. I have some journalistic connection in DC. Would you want me to like repackage this and submit it as an op-ed for some publications?" And I said, "Well, I mean, if you want to, that's great. I am really busy. I'm working like 80-hour weeks right now, so I don't have the time to do that. Yeah, if you want to try, go for it." And he was like, "Okay, I'll do it." And he submitted them to some different publications, and
Mm,
an op-ed that I wrote got eventually published on Newsweek.
wow.
Yeah, and Aya saw that, and they were like, "Okay, this guy writes as well, so let's see if we can do we can do a project with him." And so I did a project with him called The Traveler, which is still probably one of my favorite things that I've ever written. And Aya
Mm,
did such an incredible job. And it's just about the experience of a travel nurse, and just from sort of a first person view. And that kind of built that relationship more, and then ultimately led to where I'm at as of last year. I joined them late last year part-time in this new role as nurse fellow, and then earlier this year I switched to full-time in that role. And yeah, basically the real crux of it is the idea that we need people to help understand and advocate for clinicians in every space. And we need clinicians who are engaging in these spaces in good faith, who care about nursing, who care about travel nursing, and who want to see, nurses empowered, who want to see nurses who feel like they're in control of their career. And so, externally, I do educational stuff for nurses, for travel nurses, where I create and share and write and talk about commentary about travel nursing, and I share those experiences. And then internally, I do some work where I kind of help provide that nursing perspective and nursing experience where I can, and I'm always a big believer that, one of the biggest myths, sort of disbelief about nursing, is just that
mm,
there is no consensus, right? Nursing is such a diverse workforce, and nurses bring their like life experience, their clinical experience into, how they see the world. And because of that, no one, no one can speak for all nurses. That's just
yeah.
impossible. And no one should try. And I'm certainly not, arrogant enough to think that I can speak for all nurses. And I'm a big believer in the importance of bringing voices in, bringing diversity in to help connect people and be a bridge. And that's really one of the things that I want to do the most in healthcare, is just to be a bridge and to help connect people to the work of clinicians, help connect people to clinicians directly. And so that there's a better understanding on the operational side of healthcare about the challenges and the work of the clinical side of healthcare.
Great story, Zach. I mean, that's really amazing how you got connected with Aya, and certainly too, it's very clear to me you are a very busy person, multi-talented and very busy too. Like you have a lot going on. Um, Talking about the journey over the past couple of years, obviously, you mentioned the pandemic and your time working during the pandemic. A lot has changed over the past 12 to 18 months in the travel nursing industry. Can you give me a little bit of your perspective in terms of what the travel nurse landscape that looks like now? What has changed? And maybe a bit about what you see going forward for travel nursing.
I think maybe my perspective, just because I have seen the travel nursing market change like multiple times, even prior to the pandemic, and then after the pandemic, and then sort of in this like multi post pandemic phase that we're in now, is that my perception is that the travel nursing market is sort of always changing.
Yeah.
And there's obviously the ebb and the flow of just normal staffing needs that happens. And there's so many factors that play into that. I think one of the things that I've been thankful for with some more exposure to the operational side of healthcare is that, I'm realizing just how big of a picture it really is. In terms of, travel nursing is a part of nursing staffing. Nursing staffing is a part of hospital staffing.
Yeah.
Hospital staffing is a part of, the greater healthcare picture, the greater, and it's like we're all in this big ecosystem and we're one part of it. And so, in terms of what's happening right now, I think for nurses who are feeling like the sting, they're not sure if it's worth it. And that's a question that I hear a lot: is travel
Yeah.
nursing worth it anymore?
Mhm.
I think that really, I think it is, absolutely. I think there's a thousand reasons why travel nursing is worth it. I mean, for me, I didn't get into travel nursing for the money exclusively.
Mhm.
I was under the impression that travel nurses got paid well, and I think that's still true. But I did not get into it for the money. I got into it for the experience. I got into for for the travel, for the expanding my clinical skill set, so for those things. And so for those travelers, I think it's worth sort of identifying, okay, why did I get into traveling? Why do I want to stay in traveling? And even though I'm such a big believer in travel nursing, I'd be the first person to tell a nurse that asked me, travel nursing might not be the best option for you. That's
Yeah.
okay. Not every nurse is supposed to be a traveler. Not every nurse is supposed to stay a traveler. And that's why there are so many different options in terms of and more by the day in terms of the way that hospitals are looking at their staffing and the way that they're trying to make it more flexible and have more autonomy for clinicians. And so I think that's really the future in terms of there are absolutely nurses. There will always be a need for travel nurses, and there are absolutely needs for per diem nurses, and there are absolutely needs for staff nurses. And so
Yeah.
what mix of those things all happen together to equate to hospital staffing, and how that creates flexibility for nurses, I think is very much dependent on the hospital system and the agency and those sorts of things and the market you're trying to get into. But yeah, I think it goes back to what your motivation is and why are you doing what you want to do.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to your earlier statement about asking yourself the tough questions, right? Asking
Totally.
yourself a tough question about why do
Yeah.
you want to be a travel nurse, and making sure that your vision, if you will, or desires kind of line up with the way it's actually going to be, or are you getting into it for the right reasons? So yeah, definitely great advice. Um, Zach, in the last few minutes here, I'd like to have you talk a little bit more about Aya, as an organization and as a traveler. For those that are considering working with Aya Healthcare as a traveler or a travel nurse, what can you say about working with Aya, the benefits of working with Aya? What can you tell travelers about Aya Healthcare as an organization?
I think first and foremost, one of the things that I've come to realize as a traveler is that support is important,
Yeah.
infrastructure is important, efficiency is important in the organizations that you're partnering with, right? And I do think it's a partnership. I don't, I think that depending on like what maybe a clinician's experiences in their career prior to traveling, they may not view their relationship with their agency as a partnership. But I am very clear in that I believe that it is a partnership, and that as a nurse, that we are an asset to an agency or an asset to a hospital that we work for when we're contracted there. And my perception of the market and my perception and my personal experience with Aya has just told me that in terms of that infrastructure, in terms of that support, in terms of that efficiency, that they, really do things the best. I think one of the, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but especially with all of the sort of noise that exists right now in the travel nursing market, there's so many agencies. I remember feeling overwhelmed when I started traveling over 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And for travelers today, that noise is amplified times 100.
Right.
And there's a lot of promises made about what that travel nursing experience is like. There's a lot of claims made about what these agencies or what this experience is going to deliver to you as a traveler. One of the things that I've appreciated so much about Aya is that everything that they do is transparent. They're very much all of their job boards are updated in real time. I've always felt it, particularly for my recruiter, like he was a resource for me because he was a market expert. And so having someone in my corner who cared about my needs, who cared about my career goals, as opposed to just being sort of on my own and this lone maverick mentality,
Yeah.
was hugely important for me. And I think it's hugely important for travelers who are interested in getting into traveling today.
Imagine when you combine the expertise of some of the great recruiters there at Aya, along with obviously as one of the most well-known and largest healthcare staffing firms out there. They have tremendous resources that they can bring to bear. Their technology is fantastic. So I'd imagine that that's a great combination, the expertise of the recruiters combined with that great kind of infrastructure support.
Totally. Yeah. And I would even add that, beyond that is just also the reach that you have as a traveler, because of the size of their job network. That's something I've gained a lot more appreciation for over the last, year or so. And just how much work goes into the back line of creating these relationships and building these relationships that then travelers can access, right? Travelers can come in and access because of the work that an agency like Aya has done to, obviously a lot of people have like these goal locations that they want to go to, right? People like want to go to the Pacific Northwest and they want to go to the beach and they want to go to the city and they want to do all those things. And, for me, I've had those experiences and I've loved them. And I've also taken assignments in places that I never would have imagined that I would have been like compelled or interested in that area. And I loved those assignments. And so, I think all of that reach across the US just gives so many options for travelers, and that empowers them and gives you more flexibility in your career.
Be prepared for the adventure, and it can be a
Exactly.
wonderful adventure if you're ready to explore. Zac, it has been great to speak with you. You've had an amazing journey, and your new role at IA sounds very, very exciting. So I know you're very busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time today. And we look forward to seeing you at TravCon. We're just at this point. By the time this podcast is posted, we'll only be a couple of days away from TravCon. You talk about community. I know this will be your first time, but I think you'll see certainly at TravCon the amazing community that comes together and learns and celebrates and connects with agencies. It's really a wonderful experience. But I look forward to seeing you and the rest of the great Aya team at TravCon coming up. But appreciate your taking the time today.
Well, on that
Very
note,
much.
Steve, before we go, on that note, I do have a question for you. What advice would you give to someone who's going to TravCon for the first time?
A great question. I would say a couple of things. Number one, similar to what you were talking about before, explore, keep your horizons open.
Mm,
It is not an event to be introverted.
mm,
You need to go out and meet people, meet fellow travelers. You need to meet agencies. You need to experience things. We have many travelers that go in small groups or what have you. We have a lot of people that go on their own,
mm.
and they end up making friends really for a lifetime. We have
Wow.
people that have gone for, this is our 16th year. We have people that have been at all 16 years. Certainly, many people have been to multiple TravCons, but it's really about that in-person engagement, which,
Hmm.
despite all of the electronic connection that we can do today, there's nothing like being in person, as I know you
Totally
well
agree.
know.
Yeah.
So it's just be extroverted, if only for a few days. Meet people, engage, be open. That's really what it's all about. And I think that be open to all the different experiences that you can have, not only in the conference but also Las Vegas is a wonderful place to spend a few days into. So that would be my advice. Be extroverted.
Well, I love that. I'm so excited to be there, and I will be at the Aya booth. So if anyone is listening to this and wants to come, I would please love for you guys to come over to the Aya booth and say hi, and I would love to connect with you.
Absolutely. He is Zac Shephard, registered nurse and nurse fellow at Aya Healthcare. Zac, again, great to speak to you, and we look forward to seeing you at TravCon.
All right, thanks, Steve. Take care.
Thank you.